The Y Curve with Phil Dobbie and Roger Hearing.
The new Prime Minister in waiting.
Is Keir Starmer on the way to number 10?
And what will it mean if he is?
You'd be hard put to name 3 Labour policies. Most Labour MPs probably would too.
In a desperate bid for power, the leadership is making sure it offends nobody. If you don't have any position on anything, there's nothing for anyone to object to.
So will just being not Tory do?
Or does the party need to get a vision in place for post-Conservative Britain?
And what will that Labour vision be?
The Y Curve.
Now, you wrote that introduction,
I
just feel it might be a little bit unfair. In that I feel like at this conference we have started to get at least the green shoots of policies.
Come on, name one.
Well, they've got a policy on housing. They've got
That's vague.
Yeah, for sure. But they've got, the idea is, though, that they want to devolve more responsibility to local authorities, which is very different to the approach taken by the Tories, which is let's just get rid of any green requirements so that you can...
We'd like to devolve more authority. I mean, it's not the sort of thing people will march in the streets on, is it, frankly?
All right, energy, this idea that we'll have a new energy board that will be the way I'm not... again, they're going to flash out the detail of it, but
I think we can hear the indeterminacy.
If they're listening, I can give them that policy.
Well, that's the important
which I think is that you've got a central body that buys up energy from various sources to get the best price, so you compete against imported energy versus domestically produced fossil fuels versus green energy.
What do we want? A new Quango. When do we want it? Now.
But that new Quango might be what's needed. But I tell you what, a totally privatised energy industry with competition is not working.
No.
And hopefully, you can't privatise the sources of power because it's coming from all over the world. But you could nationalise. Sorry.
Yeah.
But hopefully they wouldn't see the sense to nationalise this retail competition level, which is just achieve nothing and confuse everybody.
Sensing you want input on these policies.
Yeah,
nothing else. But there aren't any policies. That's the problem.
That is the problem.
Not enough to throw anything out. And
maybe that is the secret. Maybe if there's a whole load of people thinking, well, if they could just do this, if they don't tell us what they're doing, then we can hope that's what they'll do.
It's a blank sheet of paper. You can write anything on you want. And if you want a blank sheet of paper, I offer you Keir Starmer.
Yeah. Well, there we are. You see, that is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know whether it comes from surgery or just a lot of training by experts.
I think you should lend him some of your charisma.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Can he be given charisma?
You can give it to him.
Well, I'll need to keep back some for myself.
But you've got so much.
I know. I'm a giving sort of person, aren't I? So he could.
This is the answer.
If that was the case, they would clearly win and be in power for a long time, wouldn't they?
Well, he wants 10 years. That's what he says.
Really?
No, he's definitely after 10 years. That's what he wants. And it's a couple of in Tory terms, it's about 4 prime ministers worth. But I think the thing is, he thinks he's going to. Well, the pitch is they've messed it up so badly. We need to do an awful lot.
Well, certainly. Watching we have to come clean. We're recording this actually a little bit earlier in the week than we normally would, so we haven't caught all of the conference, but we've caught a big chunk of it.
Yeah.
It feels like there's a lot more confidence there and togetherness than there was in the Tory Party conference last week. There's no one is after Keir's job, for example.
No.
Everybody is after Rishi's job.
Yes. So Jeremy Corbyn is not there.
Well, and that they've got to be thankful for that this week of all weeks, haven't they, with what's happening in Israel?
Well, exactly. And they've been very forward in saying, look, this is our position and making sure there's no intimations of anti-Semitism whatsoever.
Because that could have derailed the whole conference if Jeremy, had been there. Right. Okay. Well, let's talk more about it then.
Yeah. Matthew Flinders is Professor of Politics at Sheffield University, and he joins us now.
Okay. So, Matt, and I'm just wondering what kind of alternate universe we are in right now, because we have the Labour Party talking about economic growth. Maybe they'll bring the party that brings taxes down. They're really saying that they are the safe pair of hands. They are managing the economy. They putting an end to sticking plaster politics. It sounds like the sorts of things the Tory party would be saying after many years of Labour government.
Well, it's certainly quite an amazing time in British politics at the moment. The great long-standing historical tradition we had for stability, clarity and good governance seems to have somehow moved away from us. And of course, the Labour Party are historically weak when it comes to managing the economy. So what we have at the moment is a Labour Party that is doing everything it can to underline the fact that it's focusing on growth, not new taxes. And that is all about trying to combat this image that you can't trust Labour with your money, something that they are desperate to move away from.
But you'd assume after the experience we've had in the last year and a half, it would be an open goal. I mean, the Tories to claim that they are in any way custodians of sensible economic policies would be, well, I mean, on the doorsteps, that's a very hard line to sell, isn't it?
And are they, therefore, just saying, hey, look, we're like the Tory party used to be?
I think it's a hard one to pull off at the moment. But then I also think sometimes the public can have paradoxical memories. That, of course, we've had the devastation of the Liz Truss interlude, but there is something deeper going on here where I just can't help but feeling amongst the public there is this embedded view, which is often counter to the evidence, that you can trust the Conservatives with money in a way that you can't with Labour. Now, whether that's actually true or not is one thing, but I think there's a framing issue that Labour have always been weak on. The idea that Labour comes in, spends lots of money, loses control, then the Conservatives come back and sort things out. It might be pie in the sky and a fairy tale, but it has a sort of popular swing to it, which the Labour Party really is trying to break.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there was a famous Reggie Maudling quote that Britain is a conservative country that sometimes votes Labour, and that really is the issue you're talking about. They've somehow got to turn it round, but it does feel as if doing nothing, almost, not offending anyone, is the way to do it, because if you are not Tory right now, it's an open goal.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, in a sense, politics is all about reconciling divergent views. And in the last few years, the Labour Party has basically kept its head down. Now, that's for a number of reasons. First of all, Keir was spending a huge amount of time doing the very sort of unattractive under the water work of changing the Labour Party's internal dynamics and positioning. Of course, you had Brexit and COVID, which meant it was very hard for the opposition to get much media attention. And also the Labour Party was quite content to focus on attacking and doing what the opposition does. The problem is that strategy will only work to a point. Now, with the next general election coming so soon, 28th of January 2025 is the final day, the public and the media are now looking to the Labour Party and saying, well, there's no point just attacking the Tories. What are you going to do? Give us the specifics. And of course, the challenge there is as soon as you get specific, you inevitably start to alienate people and rouse opposition. But that's exactly where the Labour Party are at the moment. There is a massive appetite for detail on how will you actually deliver these 5 goals.
Well, we were, just before we started talking to you, we were talking about the idea of this energy body, which, the Labour Party has raised. And we don't know what it's going to mean. But I had my view about what it might do. Now, I might be disappointed because their view of actually how this is going to play out could be very different. And so that's the problem, is that as you flash out the detail, even of sort of stated policy areas, there is the danger that if you don't carry everyone with you, you're going to start losing people. So,
and it's interesting they have 5 goals rather than 5 policies, in effect. It's like, well, think places we'd like to be.
But it's all about drip feeding, isn't it? So this is where we're going to go, and now we have to, because there's got to be an education process along the way through all of this, hasn't there?
Well, I think in many ways it's interesting. The Labour Party are in, I would say, a broadly positive position, although obviously the danger of overconfidence is one that any party needs to be careful of. But it's also in a bit of a pincer movement position because it has these goals. And at the same time, the public are demanding detail on what are the policies that you will implement to deliver these goals. But then at the same time, above that, Keir Starmer is still haunted by the V word, the vision thing. And that is really something which all the surveys come back. The public are still slightly unsure what Keir Starmer and the Labour Party stands for today. And in many ways, that vision is the cement that should then incorporate those goals and trickle down into the policies. So the vision thing really is what this Labour Party conference has got to deliver.
And has it so far? I mean, there's been some fairly impressive speeches. Well, I mean, everything's relative, isn't it? After last week, where, as we said on the podcast last week, it was really just auditioning for the top job. I mean, there's some talent in the Labour Party.
Well, OK, let's go back to the vision thing. Have we had the vision yet? No. And I think this is an interesting issue that in many ways, one of the great qualities of Keir Starmer as a leader is that at root, he's a pragmatist. He's a pragmatist. He's a radical pragmatist. The problem in politics with being a radical pragmatist is that you're seen to have no real deep inner conviction.
Yeah, he should be number two, really, shouldn't he, rather than number one?
In many ways, he is quite technocratic, quite generalist, and quite pragmatic. Politics at a certain level, though, is about passion. It's about energy. It's about direction. And what any party needs to be able to do at the moment, and this is very crude, but unfortunately it's true, what is the offer that you've got? What is the offer that is going to grab the attention of the public and pull it into line behind you? We know there are lots of people out there who are floating around and are ready to align behind a really good, strong offer. Whether that vision offer is really there, particularly when everyone keeps inevitably harping back to 97, then we're just not in that situation.
Well, I was going to bring up 97 because obviously the parallel is very apparent. You know, a lame sort of Tory administration, gone on too long, uninspiring leader, and now you have the Labour issue. But I mean, 97 was very different. You had a very much more charismatic leader. It's hard to imagine the Tories putting out devil eyes on a poster of Keir Starmer and people not falling about laughing. It is a situation where also in 97, as I remember, you had a pretty clear programme of what was going to be done. And is there a sense that this could be some sort of 97 repeat in any way?
No, and I think that's the problem. You cannot smell it in the air. I mean, unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember 97 very well, to remember spending the whole night. I mean, there was an electricity and energy in the air from Scunthorpe to Southampton and all parts in between. The things can only get better. People were singing it on the Mall because there was a real, almost like we'd call it today, Obama-esque belief that things were going to get better. We're not getting that sort of mood music at the moment. I mean, I also remember, you remember we were just talking about the 5 goals and a lack of detail. What you had under Tony Blair was the pledge card. Remember the little pledge card the size of a credit card? This is what we will do. You could put it down on the table. The public understood what they thought they were getting. At the moment, we don't have that precision. And of course, also at 97, the Labour Party had what was clearly a government in waiting. If you look at the, dare I say, the big beasts of the shadow cabinet, male, female, the Jack Straws, the Blunkets, the Browns, it was a menagerie of talent. Now, I'm not saying that today's Labour Party isn't maybe I am saying it's not equally impressive. All I'm saying is that in terms of a team, it's clearly not as mature in terms of his experience. And I think that's one thing that Keir has maybe lacked, bringing on and allowing the future generation of talent to get a visibility with the public.
Is that because he is a bit wary of the party still? I mean, this was a party that turned on itself pretty much over the last 4 or 5 years. A lot of infighting. Is he still wary about the fact that the party might yet screw it up internally?
Well, I think one of the interesting things that we don't talk about is that the leader of the Labour Party has a lot more constraints on their ability to do things and to select their shadow team than the Conservatives do. And I think that is a real interesting constraint on Keir, and also this idea about trying to balance out the party and represent all the different factions. Also, I think in recent years, Keir Starmer has just been fairly hard to reach. I think he's had a relatively small team around him. It's been quite a protective machine around Keir, and there has been a reluctance to let other members of the team have a lot of airtime.
So it seems like there's a few obvious things that he could do. I mean, when it's coming to that vision, and it's almost like going back to traditional Labour values to say, well, OK, energy, it's not working. Let's renationalise it. I mean, the party wants him to do that. He seems reluctant to go down that road. Transport, HS2. I mean, he's held back on saying, well, it was a mistake to get rid of that. And yet, if he was there saying, well, we've got to try and reinstate it if we can, if it's not been completely hijacked, so that we have a national infrastructure build that's happening that's going to help the north-south divide. Actually, strangely, a lot of policies that Jeremy Corbyn had been talking about that at the time weren't palatable, perhaps are now, because, taking Europe as another one as well, actually saying, well, yeah, a lot of younger people, given the chance, would want to be back in Europe. So he could be going a harder line on, we're going to find ourselves more involved in Europe. I mean, but all of those areas where obviously there could be kickback from some people, but maybe he's got to have the balls to actually say, I don't care, that's the road we're going down.
Well, in a sense, that's the risk of the trap, that you can play it too safe and end up going backwards. I mean, yeah. I think as a personality, Keir Starmer isn't really one for taking radical steps or being brave in quite that way. But what's interesting is that actually under Jeremy Corbyn, some of the renationalisation projects ideas were actually incredibly popular with the public. The slight issue for the Labour Party now is that this issue about they have to project a view of economic competence. So being linked to debates around renationalisation, committing to HS2, they have to be very, very careful that isn't immediately picked on by their opponents as just signs of another profligate.
But renationalisation of railways is an easy one, isn't it? Because it's happening by default.
It's happening like salami slicing bit by bit by bit. And we've seen this in many areas. I think one of the things that COVID actually did was it redefined the debate about the private sector and the public sector. Suddenly, in many areas, the value of the public sector, its capacity for intervention, wasn't seen as de facto automatically a bad thing, and that there was a need for a more sophisticated relationship between the two. So I think that's the sort of story or narrative that the leader could be telling, and need to reimagine, redefine, redevelop this notion of the state for the future rather than the past. Now, of course,
well, are they heading that way though? So Jonathan Reynolds was talking about this formulation of GB Energy. And the party was disagreeing on whether they should renationalise energy in total. But he's talking about a company that can manage all energy, public and private, and bring it all together. It doesn't seem like a bad idea, but, the devil is in the detail. And maybe it's too early to give that detail, but that's a sort of like a green shoot of a policy anyway, isn't it?
It is, and that's great. But the one of the issues here, it's having the interesting, dare I say, radical policies, the big ideas, which can capture the public's attention. But there's a slightly more, dare I say, political element here, that even if the ideas aren't that radical, politicians can still they can still present a vision, a story and a narrative that is designed to pique the interest of the public and make the public believe that you have a government in waiting with energy and drive and ambition. And that's what we're not quite getting. When you look at the shadow cabinet walking along the road in Liverpool, you don't see the body confidence of a group of people ready for power. They look slightly scared.
Well, let's pick up, as well they might. But there's one other thing. I mean, it's interesting you draw that picture of them walking along, because one of the things, if we move away from the economy slightly, perhaps more towards culture wars, which is another big theme that certainly the Tories were pushing in Manchester. If you look at that shadow cabinet and you compare it to the cabinet, what you notice is actually, the first thing is a diversity thing. You have more women of colour in the cabinet. You have powerful people in the Tory cabinet who represent a more diverse Britain, it seems, than the Labour cabinet do. And it seems a very odd thing. And that pays into a whole series of culture war issues like immigration, education, law and order, where they can say things on the right that Labour can't, because it doesn't have that kind of image and process.
Yeah, and I think this is a real potential Achilles heel for Keir Starmer. Being able to answer basic questions, how do you define a woman, is such I know it's a completely set up explosive question to ask in the current context, but you really do need a leader who is willing to just answer the question in a way that is inevitably going to disappoint some sides and might attract a huge amount of vitriol from certain very small minorities. But in the past, when Keir Starmer has refused or elaborated with some sort of academic lecture on the nature of gender and development, that completely puts off what would be vast sections of the natural Labour electorate.
Right. So in other words, he should just answer it quickly and move on. And if he doesn't, then it just stays in the public debate for a longer period of time.
It will stay in the debate anyway. It's just going to be there.
Yeah, but if he spends more time talking about other stuff, it's like keep on firing other stuff, then maybe that just falls into the background. But when you talked about them all sort of like shrugging along, their shoulders hunched as they walk through the streets.
Well, it is Manchester,
Well, it's Liverpool, though.
Oh, Liverpool, yeah. Well, same thing.
So what they need, do they need does Ted Lasso need to come and coach them? Do they need somebody that is going to give them that? Is it as simple as that? They just need a coach to tell them, look, you've got a chance to win here. Just make it look like you actually have confidence that that's what's going to happen.
Well, I think, again, this goes back to the leadership. And, as I said, Keir Starmer has a huge number of qualities. But if we once again fall into the trap of comparing him to Tony Blair in 97, is Keir ever going to be the sort of person that can talk to a team, build it up, foster belief, put the tin hats on, over the top, off we go together, let's make big change happen, let's transform British society and grab our chance by the horns? Yeah. It's not his style.
Yeah, and there's Rishi doing exactly that, isn't he? He's saying he's bringing change while promising nothing.
Rishi doesn't look convincing either. That's the thing. He doesn't. He's not going to get.
At least he's trying.
Well, they all try. But what about on the big edge? Education, immigration. These are the kind of issues where you can still remember now. In '97, it was education. It was hammered home as a policy, and in fact, money in the end did go much more into education. So is that the problem?
Well, one of the problems, again, is that you have these 5 goals, but what's bizarre about them is that the education doesn't really seem to filter through any of them. I would imagine it would come under equality of opportunity, but if you were to ask now, it might be just 6 months away from a general election, what is the Labour Party's big idea in relation to education? How does early years education flow through primary, secondary into post-school education? What's the future for universities? Now we've rejoined Horizon and the EU. How do we remain a scientific superpower? I'm not sure where I would even go to find those answers. So the fact that education isn't an absolute golden light shining through everything they're doing seems, again, a really massive...
an opportunity to spin that would actually be like, for example, on the HS2, why has it cost so much? What are the skills that we are lacking in this country, which is making it so expensive to do a massive engineering project like that? Is it a failing of the education sector? Do we need to ramp up more skills internally so that
or do we bring skills in from the outside? This idea that immigration, which has become such a huge bugbear, could actually produce and provide people with the skills that we actually lack in our own system.
More of a vote winner, though, isn't it, to say we're going to skill up internally?
Well, that's the problem, isn't it?
Okay, well, you've hit on a really important point here. Look, let's stop. Let's step back from the whole issue about parties and leaders and just look at the social context. The British public are totally and utterly fed up with politicians. They're fed up with political institutions, political processes, the data, the surveys. We're on rock bottom. We are in real issues around public confidence in our political processes. But more than that, we're almost wrapped up with this damp, dark net of pessimism, that everything's going wrong. We don't know where we're going. Politicians are all in it for themselves. The real opportunity at the moment, and I think particularly for the Labour Party, is almost to recast a fresh politics of optimism that turns many of these challenges that we're all well aware of into opportunities for the future of society.
Which, of course, is what Tony Blair was all about, wasn't it?
Well, Tony was very good at doing this, but I don't understand why, at the moment, nobody seems willing. There is a lack of broad confidence amongst the political class in order to stand up and say, we need to redefine how we interpret these issues as challenges for us rather than issues that will repeatedly hold us down.
So there's no one really pushing that line on the Labour side. I mean, you've got some people who Rachel Reeves, I suppose, stands out, Angela Rayner, people who perhaps, kind of give that vibe, but they're not going to be allowed anywhere near the top because Keir is terrified that people with a vision thing, it may be the vision thing that actually turns people off. It may be the red wall flees away from that.
Well, I mean, it's because they look at, and it's the wrong vision, but Liz Truss has a vision.
Yes.
And she puts it across in a very forceful fashion.
Very, very slowly and
very slow. I know she's been trained badly again, but it's but at least she's got a direction, which is what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think this vision goes back to the offer that what the British public really want is an element of self-belief amongst their politicians that they are also able to nurture new relationships and nourish new forms of community in a way that really is good for everybody, which you would think would be totally new Labour terrain. I mean, I think actually there is I'm very interested in the way Wes Streeting has been telling his story. And I think if there was somebody who does understand a lot of these issues and has potential in this space, I mean, I think Wes Streeting is somebody that has been quite clever in promoting himself without annoying the leadership, but clearly developing a brand and an agenda.
A very good book, actually, a very well-written book, actually interesting, and taking Labour into that area where it does need to be. But Matt, let's put you on the spot now. We're now potentially less than a year away from an election. How do you see it playing out? Do you see Labour seizing this kind of high ground you're talking about, or do you see ever increasing caution as we get towards the point of people going to the polls?
So I am rather isolated that I'm still not at all thinking that it's a done deal for the next general election. At the moment, I would probably see the Conservatives winning with a small majority. I don't think if you look at the polls...
You think the Conservatives will win the next election?
Yeah, because I think that too much caution on the Labour Party side will play into the hands of the Conservatives that are often seen by many people as the natural governing party. Also, I think in the next 12 months, if we push the election back as far as possible, there could be some economic shifts. Depending what happens with the court case, there might be some move with Rishi Sunak's ability to deal with the small boats. And of course,
this is the Rwanda case that's going through.
The Rwanda case. And of course, also the HS2 issue is not just about long-termism. It's creating some wiggle room in the Conservative budgets to unleash before the next general election. So my slight fear is that politics is at the moment a very fluid business. I think there is an opportunity for the Labour Party to go out hard with a clear, strong vision as a team for the future. But if it continues with this very cautious, almost winning by default approach, they might find they don't win.
They lose it, yeah. So the problem is, of course, and just to support that view, perhaps, is it's very easy for the Tory party to say that we are going to make sure that we live within our means, which everyone sees the government budget as a household budget because that's what they understand. It's harder for a Labour Party to say, well, we think we can invest in certain areas, which might mean we go into more debt in certain areas, but these are investments and we'll see a long-term payback. People don't want to hear that sort of thing right now, even though it might be the best thing for the country. The idea and I think this is part of the problem here is, it's part of it's an understanding of education and the way the economy works, but also it's that requirement for that 15-second soundbite on the evening news on TV. And I don't know how you get around that problem. So if you've got anything if you've got a policy that takes more than 15 seconds to explain, you've lost.
And also, of course, the changing international landscape may well also help the incumbent government. The things that are happening at the moment in Israel and Palestine, it not only creates more fears amongst the public about economic fluctuations and change that might make them think that continuity is better, it might also give Rishi Sunak opportunities to adopt that high international leader visibility in the way that Boris tried to do it in the Ukraine. Also, Rishi Sunak, individually, he's quite popular with the public. He in the Midlands, north of England, in local communities, they really like him. So it's interesting that although I completely understand why so many people think it's almost a done deal that there will be a change in government, I just think it's far, far, far closer than a lot of people believe.
But Matt, people walking to the polling stations, past the potholes in the roads, they can't get the train because it doesn't work. They've got all sorts of issues about perhaps in some parts more immigrants coming in than they want, all these kind of things. Just the broken Britain theme, which is very strong. Isn't that in and of itself going to be a getter of votes for Labour?
No, not unless they honestly believe Labour are going to do anything better. And that's the key issue. And
Rishi's got 10% of that HS2 fund to fix those potholes, remember?
Exactly.
Whereas Labour's coming out without the costs.
HS2 was not about the long-term strategic. It was about how do I squeeze money into my piggy bank for short-term electoral benefits. And in some sense, that's very clever politics. So, of course, in the long term, the British public and the north of England will pay for that. So Rishi's got some money now to do some very attractive tax breaks or investments in parts of the country that might particularly lean towards him. But also the Labour Party's got to have a convincing retail offer to that man or woman walking down the road in Sheffield to the polling booth that makes them really believe that if I vote, it's going to make any difference. And actually, the big question isn't who they vote for. It's getting them to walk down the street in the first place. And that's a big challenge for the Labour Party. Conservative voters are generally far better at turning out to vote than Labour voters. So the Labour Party have not only got to get that retail offer out there and that energy, but they've got to get people out into the ballot box.
Yeah, and the older voters tend to vote more and they tend to be more conservative, and the younger ones, perhaps more eco-friendly, less likely to vote.
But if they think that the Tory party may win, maybe they'll be out in their droves. But just getting back to this belief that maybe, just maybe, Rishi will win, which would be nice for Rishi, wouldn't it? Because he would actually have won an election. He would actually be legitimately there as somebody who's been voted for. But, in the polls, I mean, since the conference, I'm looking at the Redfield and Redfield and Wilton survey. Since the Conservative Party conference, they've actually fallen in the polls from 2% down to 27%. Labour's on 43%. If you add the Greens and the Lib Dems, then sort of left of centre parties are polling 62% of the vote. I mean, that's
and
a
you're
big
actually
call.
100%. And the Rutherglen and Hamilton West, that really was unexpected, and it's hard to dismiss that as it's just a by-election. 20% swing from SNP to Labour. Sir John Curtis has been very clear that if they could get that to transfer, that could lead up to 20, 30, maybe 40 seats, and Labour getting a stronghold back in Scotland. My slight concern is that the Labour Party do have a slight historical record of snatching defeat from the claws of victory. So it's about making sure that as we go into, not that I'm a member of the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, I want everyone to know that. I'm not bagging for either side. I'm just saying that here, as we are now, as we're heading towards a general election, the Labour Party have momentum, but it's rather a negative momentum at the moment of keep things as quiet and as slow as possible and get in by default because people think that they're so bad.
So better, you think, that they lose a few points in those opinion polls by taking a stance on some things that other people might actually see as a vision. So they solidify part of the vote, even if they have to lose some of the...
Live slightly more dangerously for the longer-term benefit.
Be bolder. I mean, because as you get closer to the general election, the public will say, are you actually a government in waiting, or are you just good at heckling at the machine? If all you can do is heckle, we might just keep what we've got.
Matthew, thank you very much for being with us. It's going to be very interesting. And I have to say, you're the first person in this sort of position to say that you don't think Labour's going to win.
First.
And it's very interesting. And as you say, bit of a wake-up call. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm sure that's going to come back to haunt me, but that's where I'm at the moment.
Hey, Matt, we'll make sure it does. We'll talk to you in a bit over a year's time.
I bet you will.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, that was...
food for thought. I've not heard someone say before in that sort of position that they don't think Labour will win, or they think Labour might not win.
Absolutely can see his point there, can't you? I mean, you just wonder. I'm not quite sure who else you'd put in charge of Keir Starmer, though. Who's the other talent that you'd have at the top? But
it's a difficult one. But Peter Mandelson apparently has been getting involved, so we could see a transformation.
Having a position would be a useful direction, wouldn't it? Now, next week, all hell has broken loose in the Middle East, doesn't it? Basically,
it has, in an area that I have spent a lot of time. Not that recently, but it does seem to repeat, though this is on a different level altogether. And we will talk about what it means, because it's one of those things that will affect all of us, however remote you might think it is.
Yeah.
And very much in the geopolitics of the moment and the economics of the moment, because it has a huge effect, obviously, on things like oil prices and things of that nature. So something we're going to delve into, see what it means for the future, and hopefully the ghastliness will be less than we think it probably will be.
Well, and we know that the repercussions are going to be felt around the world. I mean, even within London, within the UK, you're starting to see actions. It becomes an opportunity for people to suddenly start, showing their true biases on either side.
Yeah, and as we know, some of those things can come back to bite us here in the UK in very unpleasant ways.
Yeah.
And that we hope does not happen, but it is a possibility. Anyway, that's what we're going to be talking about next week.
Yeah.
On the Y Curve.
Yeah, we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.
The Y Curve.